Hello sewers and quilters, and welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Julie. I'm a quilter and quilt pattern designer, and I like to make easy to follow tutorials for the beginner quilter and the beginner sewer. I also love all kinds of crafts, and on the weekends you could probably find me at the local thrift shop sifting through all of the sewing bargains. If you enjoy my videos, please subscribe. Also, feel free to leave a comment. I do love to hear about your sewing and quilting journey as well. You can find all of my quilt patterns on my website, quiltydesires.com. I'm also very active on Facebook and Instagram. Now that we have all the boring stuff out of the way, let's get to the fun stuff. Today I'm going to show you how to make what I call the easy peasy sewing pouch. And I've called it that because it is probably the easiest sewing pouch you'll ever make. I've made quite a few of them. I make them in all different sizes, usually out of leftover pieces of fabric. As long as you have a zipper that's long enough to fit the width of the fabric that you're using, you can make these any size that you like. These ones here I've machine quilted, and this one here I've actually hand quilted. So I have been experimenting lately with a little bit of hand quilting, and I thought I would just make a pouch out of it. So yeah, I also really wanted to use this zipper pull with this binding. So yeah, another great creative idea. Today I'm going to show you how to make the larger version of the pouch, or what I class as the larger version of the pouch with the 14-inch zip, and this is the machine quilted version as well. So let's get started. To make one easy peasy zipper pouch, you're going to need a main fabric that's cut 14 inches wide by 22 inches high. You're also going to need a lining fabric that's cut 14 inches wide by 22 inches high, and you're also going to need a piece of wadding that's cut the same, 14 inches wide by 22 inches high. You're going to need two 2.5 inch by width of fabric strips for your binding. You're going to need one zipper that's 14 inches long, and if your zipper doesn't have a little zipper pull on it, then you're going to need a zipper pull as well. Also coming in handy, you'll need some quilting clips or pins. You'll need a walking foot with a guide. The guide isn't essential, we can get around that, but if you have one, it's very handy for this project. You'll also need a 1/4 inch foot, and you'll also need a zipper foot. The first thing we want to do is layer our pieces together. So I'm going to take the inside piece of fabric and lay it wrong side facing up. And then I'm going to lay my wadding on top. And then I'm going to lay my main piece of fabric right side facing up on top of the wadding. I'm going to use a little 505 spray-based spray and adhere these layers together. If you don't want to use a spray-based, you're more than welcome to pin the layers together. I just find this process is quite quick, and then we'll flip that over and we'll do the same on the reverse side, giving it a little spritz and smoothing it from the middle towards the outer edge. I'm going to use a diagonal crosshatch design for my quilting. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a Hera marker, and I'm just going to make a mark or draw a line that is from diagonal to diagonal. it actually leaves a dent. And as you can see there, that will be the first line that I sew on. You can also use an erasable marker if you wish, a friction pen. That might make it easy to see also. So make a mark from one diagonal, one corner to the other corner. I'm using a stitch width of 3.5 and a stitch length of 2.6. To start off with, I'm going to start stitching in the line that I made with the hair marker. I'm not using the guide at this point. That will come along after I've finished this first line here. So stitching directly on the line that you made with the hair marker. I have that first line stitched, and now I'm going to turn the project around and stitch the other diagonal line. Again, not using the guide at this point. Now that we have our first diagonal line stitched, we're actually going to use the guide to continue the rest of our quilting. So we're just going to place our guide on our first stitched line. And we're going to continue to quilt the rest of our project. Once we've finished our quilting, we're just going to trim off the excess. So I've just trimmed mine back to 21 high by 13.5 wide. Next, we want to prepare our binding strips by folding them in half lengthways and giving them a press. Next, I'm going to cut 2 strips of binding. Now we want to cut our binding 1 inch bigger than the width of our project. Next, we're going to sew the raw edge of our binding to the raw edge of our project with a 1/4 inch seam. And once that is done, we can flip our project around and attach the binding to the other edge of the project. What we want to do here is we want to fold the binding over so that the folded edge of the binding sits directly on top of the stitched line that we used to attach our binding with. So just like that, and then we will give it a press to hold it in place. So I'm carefully just making sure that that folded edge is sitting nicely on top of that sewn line. Seam. You can hold it in place with clips or pins if you wish, but I am going to use a little bit of school glue to hold it down. I find that this holds it quite accurately. So just a little dab. We don't want to put too much on there. School glue is also washable, so you don't have to worry about that, and it's also non-toxic. So a little bit of glue on the underside, and now I'm just going to heat set it so that it holds in place and there'll be no movement once I'm stitching that binding down. We'll turn our project around and we'll repeat that whole process on the opposite end of the project. I'm just sewing my binding down now with a 1/8 of an inch seam and making sure that we reverse stitch at the beginning and the end. We'll repeat this process for both ends of the project. Next, we're going to be sewing our zipper onto our pouch. So we're going to have to change our feet over from our walking foot to our zipper foot. Zipper foot will look like that. If you're using zipper tape, you'll just pull the sides apart and we'll attach that so that the teeth of the zipper are sitting just off the edge of the binding. So we don't want them too close so that the zipper doesn't slide across. We want to leave a little bit of a gap, maybe 1/8 of an inch. And then we're going to stitch that down. And we'll repeat that process with the other end. I like to place the edge of the zipper foot along that inside edge of the zipper tape. We'll repeat that process for the other end of your pouch. Now we want to attach our zipper pull to our zipper tape, and this can get a little bit tricky, so you need lots and lots of patience. So we need to feed the round end of the zipper pull onto the tape, one side at a time. So you just hook it in there and then you hook it in the other side. And then hopefully, if you wiggle it up a little bit, hopefully you'll be able to just slide that right on there like so. Make sure you have your zipper at the halfway point and then turn your pouch inside out so that you've got your lining facing towards you, because now we're going to sew down the sides of the pouch. So we're going to create a little bit of a top edge here, and I've come down about, I'm going to make it 2.5 inches. So 2.5 inches from the top of the pouch to the top of the zipper, and we'll measure that on both sides and just make sure that that's 2.5. And I'll pop a clip on to hold that in place. And I'll make sure that it's 2.5 inches on this edge as well. What we're going to do is we're going to sew down both side seams, this side and that side, using a 1/4 inch seam and just run backwards and forwards over your zip a couple of times to hold it in place. Trim off the excess. Now we're going to bind the sides of our pouch. So we'll take one of our binding strips and we'll lay it on the edge of our binding pouch, and we'll overhang by 1/4 inch on both sides and cut the strip off. And then we'll fold the ends under 1/4 inch and raw edge to raw edge. We'll pop a clip on. And then we'll sew that down with the 1/4 inch seam. Then we'll repeat that process with the other side of the pouch. Next, we're going to fold our binding to the front and stitch that down, placing the folded edge of the binding on our stitch line, just like we did before, and we'll do that with both sides. Now we're just going to turn our pouch right sides out. I find a chopstick is really useful for poking out the corners. Just make sure that when you are poking out your corners that you don't go all the way through. And that's our easy peasy quilted pouch finished and ready for action.